super quick introductions. If anybody, especially watching the replay, doesn't know who we are, I am Sara Candela. I'm a former English teacher from the state of New York, now living in Los Angeles, and I am the community manager for, among a million other little things, for Swivel and the Optimalist community. I host the Optimalist podcast, which almost everyone in this room has been on. We're gonna have to snag Tara for an episode. And Sean is my partner in crime slash counterpart on this endeavor that we kind of thought up together, cooked up together over the course of a couple months in the fall, called the Adaptability in Education Leadership panel series. Is that enough words in there? And I will let Sean introduce himself.
Thank you, Sara, so much. Sean Gaylord here, coming to you from North Carolina. I am a building level principal. I am the author of The Pepper Effect, published by the great Dave Burgess Consulting, Inc. And all of us here, myself and the panelists, we do have a very unique connection to the world and publishing arm of Dave Burgess, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm really grateful to be here with bandmates that way. I am also, in addition to being the author of The Pepper Effect, I am the host of my own podcast, The Principal Liner Notes. I am back to blogging again and on a regular basis, so you can find that too on principallinernotes.wordpress.com. But most importantly, I view myself as the bandmate to all of our friends here on the panel. We will be playing at the Holiday Inn in Hoboken a little bit later, so you can catch our act there. But it gives me great pleasure and great honor and great gratitude to welcome both Meghan, or all three, Meghan and Lainie and Tara, to our panel. And I'll tell you just a little bit about each, and then you'll get to know them in the scope and sequence of our conversation today. Please continue to use the hashtag adapt, lead, and connect. And whether you're viewing this live or not, and then our panelists, of course, feel free to put things in the chat as well. Meghan Lawson. Meghan is the Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning. She is the author of one of my all-time favorite books, Legacy of Learning. It is a must-read. It came out late in 2023. And Meghan, I'm just so grateful that you're here. It's always wonderful to have you in a conversation, whether it's in Zoom, in person, text, whatever.
I am so grateful to be here, and I'm so honored by your words. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Lainie Rowell, another pal and bandmate, is someone that, if you are not following all of her projects and all of her things, she is the hardest working person in show business. James Brown got nothing on you, Lainie. She is a best-selling author, award-winning educator, and international keynote speaker. She is dedicated to human flourishing, focusing on community building, social emotional learning, and honoring what makes each of us unique and dynamic through learner-driven design. I myself have been on the receiving end of all of that. She is also the author of several great books, and I'd highly recommend two. Well, all three you need to add to your bookshelf. But Evolving with Gratitude, a wonderful compendium of stories of gratitude and the research and science behind it and the human side of that. And I was very honored to contribute to that book. And then also the journal companion, which is entitled Bold Gratitude. So very grateful to have you here with us this evening or this afternoon or whenever anyone is watching this, Lainie. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It is, and then also, when we've done this, Sara has always been the West Coaster, the lone West Coaster in this. But tonight, you're not, because you and Lainie share the same state of California, same coast. Speaking of sharing states, beautiful segue to Tara Martin. I didn't think I would pull that off but I did. Do not try this at home. But Tara also shares a state with Meghan Lawson in Ohio, the great state of Ohio. Tara is one who is an enthusiastic educator, connector, keynote speaker, and the author of 2 other must-read books. I got to catch up here because I've only got one, so I need to do some catching up. But Be Real, Educate from the Heart, and the inspiring companion picture book, Cannonball In, and Tara is also one of the great faces with Dave Burgess and Dave Burgess Consulting. So she's usually if you're reading her Sunday 7 newsletter, and thank you for putting a plug in for all of us, Tara. But again, Tara, you are inspirational, and it is just a joy to have you here, and we get an opportunity to be real and cannonball in with you.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I feel like I'm just honored. I'm with Lainie. I'm just honored to be in this room. And I share the same city even as Meghan. We could actually be in the same room. We're only 10
You
minutes
might be.
apart.
You might be. So for
Wow,
those that are
really?
tuning in, let's place your bets, what have you, and I'm going to second what Meghan shared here. Tara is sunshine in human form. Truly is. So I'm babbling like a fanboy bandmate here, Sara. So usually
Those
I'm the one that gets
were
us back on track. Sarah, you get us on track here because I'm just
those were
feeling such joy and love right now.
those were some brilliant, just top form transitions, I would say, in between people. So it's a masterclass in transitioning. So tonight, everybody, we are well, first of all, just to kind of put a little bit of a umbrella over everything, we always like to remind everybody that no matter what the topic for tonight's panel, we're always speaking through the lens of being adaptable and being open to and even embracing change, especially now in this world where we're facing change constantly, and it's probably just going to need to be accepted as the normal. So that is the lens through which we conceived this whole idea of having these leadership panels and thinking about how leaders can be models for this kind of constant flexibility. And so with that in mind, tonight's topic of coaching leaders to embed social emotional health and embracing imperfection, we are really thinking about how we can start breaking the mold, as we're saying as part of the title, right? And being people that are models for not thinking that everything has to be exactly perfect at every moment, but how to embrace that friction. And so the first thing we're going to talk about, we have some really amazing questions to dive into in the next, I don't know, 30 minutes or so, hopefully. But the first thing we're going to talk about is this phrase that Lainie brings up. And I'm sure we all have thought about this in some respect, but she brings up this idea of being a thermostat and not a thermometer. So we're going to keep that mantra in mind, be a thermostat and not a thermometer. And how can leaders in education cultivate environments that actively regulate and shape social emotional health rather than merely reflecting the climate? And I was telling everybody beforehand, we've gotten into this habit of just kind of picking people to start. And so since that was Lainie's quote, I'm going to pick Lainie to kind of start us off here with how can we cultivate environments as leaders that to regulate and shape social emotional health rather than just reflecting the climate that we see prevailing.
Yeah, and we'll talk about adaptability, right? The difference between a thermostat and a thermometer. A thermostat changes, right? It doesn't just say this is how it is, it actually changes. And I think that we have this amazing opportunity and gift as humans to connect with each other and have a real influence over how we feel and how we behave. So we've got this social and emotional contagion. I know that's not necessarily everyone's favorite word. That's why I say thermostat, but we have the ability to positively influence each other. And so I think of that in every role. Yes, in leadership, but classroom teachers are leaders. Kids in classrooms are leaders. So we have this ability to positively influence. And I want to be super clear that when I'm promoting this idea of be a thermostat, not a thermometer, it's not to say that people aren't allowed to have their unpleasant emotions and we're trying to squash that or change that or make sure that's not happening. We know that all emotions serve a purpose. They're signals and signposts. And we also know the power of things like positivity and gratitude. And so we have the ability to have an influence on each other. And when we can use that influence to make people better, happier, healthier, I think that's what we want to try and do. And so I think of it as the 3 ways that I try and promote this in whatever role I'm in is I try and think about how can I use a service mindset to constantly be putting it out there for others. I'm here to help you. I'm here to serve. What can I do to make your work situation better, your life better? Like, what can I do coming from that service mindset? I'm also trying to think about intentional acts of kindness. How can I intentionally put good out there? And then, kindness holds hands with gratitude, and gratitude is about noticing that good. And so how can I see the good? Sean mentioned it. How do we see and value others? And how do I actually let them know that I see it? I think we're by nature good at noticing the bad, but like, what's right here? What's good right now?
Let's go to Meghan, if that's okay.
Yes, I feel very connected to so much of what you shared, Lainie. And I was thinking about, when we look for the good in ourselves and others, we find it. And it's about training your brain to see the good. And like you said, it's not about ignoring what's hard, it's not that we don't talk about what's hard, but it's about training our brain. And so one small move that we make in our school district on Wednesdays, which I talk about in my book, Sean's smiling because he knows it's coming. We're both big Mike Rutherford fans, is 30-second feedback, where we'll go into a classroom, and this is a protocol that Mike Rutherford has, where you spend a little time looking around, getting curious about what you see, and you move a little closer to the thing that you find interesting. And then once you see something that you really want to celebrate, you just on this little Post-it note, you write the person a note, you write the teacher a note, and you just say, "Hey, so-and-so, thanks so much for having me." And then you name the instructional move, and then you name the learning impact, and then you sign off, "Thank you, nice move." So I might say something like, when you asked students to turn and talk, it gave more students the opportunity to share their thinking. The energy in the room grew, and therefore there was more access to learning. Nice move. And it's a very small move, but it's funny. I think things like instructional rounds are scary to a lot of people because they think you're coming in to judge and, judge and jury what's happening in there, when really so much good comes from elevating the good, being just as disciplined about naming the good that we want to affirm and continue to see as the things that we're working on. And so I think that does connect to our well-being, where we see, wow, I'm doing something right here. Because I think sometimes, as community oriented as we want school to be, being alone in your classroom, taking care of your students every day can be a bit isolating.
And I'm next. I was trying to find my unmute.
I'm like, should I call on her? Or
Like, Tara, you're the whole last one. I love all of this. And I think, it's just the power of noticing. I think if we're going to be a thermostat, then we have to practice the act of noticing. And I watched a video, I think it was a couple of days ago on Instagram. It was Tony Robbins talking to someone through an interview, and he asked the guy to name all the things that were brown in the room, and or to look for all things that are brown in the room. And so the guy had like 20 seconds to look at everything brown in the room. And he said, "Okay, look at me. Now tell me what's red." And the guy couldn't tell him. And he was just like, "Oh, darn, I wasn't looking for red." Why? Because he wasn't looking for red. And I think it just depends on what we choose to notice. If we're walking in expecting to see things that are not going well, that's what we're going to notice. But if we're walking in intentionally setting our purpose to watch for those things that are positive, those things that are making a shift for students learning in the right direction, we're going to see it. And so one of the things I personally love when I'm working with educators or students is just when I notice when I focus on valuing their individuality. So I personally love to give feedback on or even just to recognize someone's individuality, the things that really stand out to me about that teacher, about that student. I want to call it out. I want to notice it. And I also want to make it known verbally. Like I want them to feel some kind of emotion. I want there to be lots of connections to what I'm noticing that is so powerful and unique about that individual. And one of the things, like if I'm talking to a teacher, I love to, when it comes to this noticing, I love to ask them a humble, I call it humble inquiry. And I got this term from a book that I read a long time ago by Edgar Sheehan, I think is his name. And it's called Humble Inquiry. And he talks about questioning and how when you ask a question that fits the humble inquiry, it is really just wide open. You're not looking for a certain response. A lot of times as admin, we walk in, we ask a question and we're looking for a very specific response. That's why we ask the question. No, these questions are just really open. They allow the person, whoever it is, to be able to talk about all the things that were happening and why they were happening and how they felt about it. And then we guide the conversation from there. But when you value individuality and you start conversations with humble inquiry, we have a better chance of allowing them to see the good, to change, to be that thermostat, not to just set the temperature on 75 and that's what it's looking like around here. No, let's just see, how are you feeling about this? What are we thinking here? And let me just tell you all these great things that I saw, because I wasn't looking for brown. I was looking for all these great things that were happening. And so that's just kind of what I think about when I think about being a thermostat. I mean, I could go in, I call these the real talk treasures. It's just the way that I like to coach in general, just whoever I'm talking to. Now I coach authors, but used to be teachers and students. But those are my first two of the 5 steps of talking to them. And I think that it fits very well with this like thermostat thermometer analogy.
What I love about this panel and like how NPR has what they call driveway moments where you're driving and you're listening to a good story on NPR and you don't want to get in the house because you still want to hear. And just in the 3 responses, just some major driveway moments that I hope folks go back and rewind and savor because very powerful. This panel series is all about adaptability and leadership and looking at things through a different lens and adapting to that. The title of this is Breaking the Mold, or that's the main title. Then we have a subtitle from that. And in some way, you've all talked about really 3 concrete things that leaders can do to adapt and lead and connect, our hashtag. I want to start off with the next question, talking about the power of 1%. Again, which is something that you don't necessarily hear in traditional leadership school. You don't necessarily hear as being the norm in terms of a leadership move. But basically what the power of 1% does is it emphasizes the significance of incremental progress. Like as Meghan, to your point, small moves, and this kind of echoes your work too. So how can, and I'll start with you, Meghan, how can education leaders, kind of harness this concept of this intentionality with the power of 1% to drive systemic change within educational institutions, specifically in embedding social emotional health? Some folks are thinking, I don't have time, I did this, but again, there's an intentionality behind that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I'm so passionate about small moves because I think I become overwhelmed so easily. So the smaller it feels, the more accessible it feels to me. And I think sometimes teachers will find themselves in team meetings as an example, and they might hear a leader say something like, well, we got to get this, we got to get these scores up, we got to get this data up, as if it was that easy, right? It'd just be happening. You know, there are many different things that contribute to educational outcomes, and people, I think, can be easily overwhelmed by that kind of pressure. And there's a quote that I love that is attributed to the Dalai Lama that says, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending the night with a mosquito.
Yes.
And I think I butchered that quote, but something along those lines. And if you
Okay,
really
both,
think about
yeah.
if you think about that, it is hard to fall asleep if you know there's a mosquito buzzing around that's going to give you that irritating bug bite. And so I think sometimes we overlook things that feel smaller and more accessible because we think, oh, if they're small, then they can't make a big enough difference. And we're here to make big gains and make big change possible. When in fact, smaller moves done, the right kind of moves done consistently over time can make a tremendous impact. And I was inspired by something I read from Chris Field in his book, A Billion Hours of Good, where he talks about how 1% of a person's day is 14 minutes. And imagine if everybody just spent their 14 minutes making the world better in the way that was important to them, the world would change. And it got me thinking, like, okay, well, what is 1% of a 7.5-hour school day? Well, that's about 4.5 minutes. What's 1% of a 50-minute class period? That's about 30 seconds. And it's really easy to just sort of cast aside this idea like 30 seconds could be a big deal. But you pose the question about, you know, what this might look like as it connects to our well-being. Well, I think about a conversation I had with a group of high schoolers who are interested in becoming teachers. And it's so fun and rewarding to talk to people who are living the experience of being a student in K-12 public school and studying to become possibly a teacher, right? And interning in our elementary schools. And they they did rounds with us, right? I was just talking about that 30-second feedback. They're out there, you know, just spreading the love with great specificity so people believe it, internalize it. And so I was talking to them about their big dreams for the kind of teacher they want to be. And then I had them then in turn ask us questions. And they said, if you could pick one thing, right? It was just really hard for us, those of us who've been around and seen a lot of things, one thing that you would say, this is such an essential practice, what would it be? And the first thing that came to mind for me is simply greeting students at the door. Greeting students at the door, using their name correctly, having some kind of special moment that is special whenever Tara was talking about honoring individuality that's between the two of you as they're coming in. That is a very small move, but Edutopia has put out some articles about the research, and that can grow time to task for students by 20%. It can decrease discipline by 9%. And it's hard to be sad as a teacher if you're excited seeing the students come to the classroom and they're excited to see you. It's really about creating belonging at the end of the day. And so that's just one small move that I would name that probably takes 30 seconds, or maybe it's 4.5 minutes of the whole scope of the day, or who knows, however many minutes it is. But just imagine if every single teacher in a school committed to that. They committed to that 1%. Their 1% plus the next person's 1% plus this person's 1%. And suddenly we're not talking about 1% at all. We're talking about slowly changing the world.
That's another driveway moment, Meghan, and beautifully stated and accessible. Like, it's a small move that you can do, add to your day, whether you're putting it on your phone or an alarm, or finding a thought partner, a bandmate. Hey, did you do your 30 seconds today? Did you do your 1%? Frank put in the chat, you know, it's acknowledge every student. But if we do that, and then if we have this kind of collective mass of intentionality, we can change the world. So I greatly value the aspirational commitment behind what you said. It's so powerful, and it's so simple and doable. You know, Tara, kind of shifting to your thoughts on that, you know, in terms of the power of 1%. I know that you, in your work, and your writing and things, you talk about very intentional moves as well, and very much valuing the social well-being, the social emotional well-being of others. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the power of 1% in your work.
For sure. I love this idea. And honestly, I didn't know exactly where this question was going to go when I saw it on the panel, but I was like really excited about it. And immediately I went to fitness. I love school, but I think this will wait. Even if you're not a fitness person, you won't be able to relate to this, I think. But a lot of times in fitness, people will talk about getting 1% better, 1% better. And that helps them to keep coming back because they feel like maybe I can't get to this big goal that I want to get to, but I can learn this tiny little skill, and I can learn this little skill, and I can build these little muscles all along the way till I can eventually do this great thing. And I think about that in just about anything that I do. And I go back to when my therapist kind of suggested that I start CrossFit. She was trying to find something for my perfection mindset to like get into something I could never be good at. And so she's like, if you get over here, I think this will be something that'll last a little longer than all these other things we had been trying. So what I love about it is she told me I needed to get to the place of having a beginner's mindset. And I think as educators and as adults, we need to put ourselves in a place where we do have that beginner's mindset so we understand what growing 1% at a time is like. And I love that Meghan was really talking about giving 1%, but I think sometimes we can think of this in the way of growing 1% too. It's another small little increment, but students and adults alike feel like they can do it. And I think that's why people can commit to a fitness program, or they can commit to a learning goal when they feel like it's broken down in chunks that are sizable enough that they can actually be successful in it. One of the things we talk about a lot in fitness is giving, sometimes our coach will say, I need you to give 70%, not of your max, 70% effort. You're 70% for today. Well, maybe you didn't get a lot of sleep. I was sick yesterday, so my 70% today was not going to be as good as my 70% when I'm fully charged. And I think it goes back to the thermostat idea. Like, we have to be able to be adaptable. That 1% might look a little bit different each day, and that's okay, because if we're just worried, if we're concerned about giving a little bit, growing a little bit, every single day, we truly will change the world, and we will help people feel like they can make these changes over time. And then when we look back, I'm looking back 4 years ago when I started, I'm like, who is this girl? Like, how am I capable of doing these things when I talk about fitness? And I love talking about that with students. I'm like, let me show you when I started. And so when they're starting a new skill, maybe it's reading a novel, maybe it's learning their letters and sounds. Like, I was in the 2nd grade when I finally learned to read. And I understand how it must be to be able to only grow at a 1% pace every single day. But eventually, I'm reading fluently. I'm not struggling in school at all. And education became a gateway to get me out of a very abusive home life, and a path that I was going to lead me to a really sad place, where my siblings and family all have gone, but it was somebody teaching me along the way that we can make these tiny little pieces, these tiny little growths, increments. We can give a little bit of effort, whatever that effort looks like each day. And my teacher was adjusting, my coaches were adjusting, and they helped me along the way. And before you know it, you look at this woman who has been able to be successful, more successful than I ever thought I could be as a little kid in that environment. So yes, if every one of us were able to give 1% every day to our students, to those that we have the opportunity to serve, whoever's in our realm of influence, we can truly change the world. I believe that.
I tell you, Tara, I love how you frame so many things. I love how you framed in your CrossFit journey, which I know that you've shared in your social media channels, and that has been very inspirational for me as somebody who's trying to stay healthy and do all those things, as well as I'm reaching my twilight years. I'm 54. But and then I also love too how you framed this when you said beginner's mindset rather than having a perfectionist mindset, which so many of us default to sometimes, unfortunately. I'm one of those too, but then we don't understand that what we deem as being perfect, whether it's looking at who we deem as the perfect leader or the best adaptable person in the room. Well, that person may have gotten to that level of what we deem perfection through these kind of incremental beginner mindset. Michelangelo, I don't know if this is attributed to him properly or not, but there's this famous quote, we've all seen the meme, where Michelangelo at the age of 87 said, "I'm still learning." And to me, that kind of encompasses the beginner's mindset that you mentioned. So I love that shift, that adaptability shift that you just shared. Lainie, what say you? Go ahead, Tara.
I just had one thing to add to that you brought up, and it reminded me of this meme. And I've talked about this on a couple of live shows, but where it has the two ladders, like one ladder has the rungs really far apart and the other
Yes.
one has the rungs just really tight together. If you were to think of those in percentages, maybe 100% is at the top, right? That's the big goal or whatever. But when you think about it in these little tiny steps, this past summer, I had a bad sickness and I was really, really sick. I was in the hospital and I kept asking my doctor, like my infectious disease doctor, like, when am I going to be able to work out again? And he finally told me, like, stop asking that question. I need you to stop worrying about fitness and start worrying about living. And I thought it was just like the cruelest thing a doctor could tell a girl that just really wanted to do well. But what he told me is, like, you need to get off of this ladder because, like, you're trying to reach rungs that you can't even jump and reach at this time. But if you would get over here and we start worrying about getting this fever broken and we start worrying about maybe standing up and walking and we start worrying about these little tiny steps along the way, before you know it, by January 1 this year, I was able to, like, be fully released to do all the things that I normally do and love to do. And we didn't even know if I was going to live, much less work out, in July. And then here we are 6 months later. But it was because I decided that the 1% growth was going to be okay for me. I had to shift my mindset to the right direction so I could start thinking and noticing the good that was coming out of such a terrible situation. And I think in life, not just in education, but in life as a leader, we have to do that. Sometimes we have to stop trying to stretch our people way too high and get them over here where they can start making some gains.
Yeah, beautifully stated. Meet people where they are and celebrate where they are and be visible and visceral in that support. So thanks for that addendum. Lainie, what are your thoughts on the power of 1% and how this can be this kind of shift that Meghan and Tara talk about in terms of helping others embrace their imperfectionism, if you will, but then also nurture and make some moves towards sustaining social and emotional health and well-being for others and the self.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they both spoke so eloquently, you too, Sean. And Tara, you took me back to watching you go through that health journey was really difficult. And I'm so glad you're here with us. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that story, because that was something we all wanted to know how you were doing. I think the meme, that graphic that Tara is referring to, where the rungs are so far apart, that reminds me very much of a James Clear quote, where it's like, people think what they need is intensity, what they really need is consistency. And to me, you're looking at that ladder with those huge rungs. You can't reach the next rung. That's too much intensity. What you need is consistency. So to every day make it up one small rung is going to have a huge impact. So I'll just add, and this is something that I learned from Mandy Freilich, to try and for me, I don't call it balance, I call it equilibrium. To reach equilibrium, I'm trying to make sure that I'm taking care of myself physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. And spiritually doesn't need to mean religion. But for me, part of the 1% is trying to do something in all of those every day. But just because it's physical doesn't mean, and for the record, I'm never doing a Tara Martin workout on my best day, but
Same here.
it could mean walking around the block. It could mean walking, out to recess duty. It could mean walking the cafeteria and just getting some movement in. And I think if we're doing those small things and we're modeling that for our team, for the kids, I'm making sure and I'm taking care of myself physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. The spiritually for me would be, it's my faith, but it's gratitude. And those are together for some people and not for others. And it doesn't have to be, but to me, it's those consistent moves that I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you, Lainie, and I appreciate that too, because, we've got two major CrossFit, folks, Meghan with the dead weights and those things. I know they're in the same town, and we've seen some of their videos where they're working out together, and I'm like, here I am on my little elliptical here with my little workout jam, my James Brown and my Beatles, but I'm doing the best that I can, and I'm celebrating that. I'm not good with weights. I'm not good with Peloton. Those are not my jams, right? But I'm heading into that 1%, that growth. I'm 1% better. I'm going to do one more minute on the elliptical. I'm gonna breathe a little bit more. I'm going to turn up the music a little bit louder. I'm going to smile at the person next to me and encouragement, right? So all of those things that you say, I love, again, your connectedness, connected to the self, connected to all of those kind of areas, but then also that empowers you to be connected to others. So Sara, I don't know about you. I mean, this just some really powerful wisdom here for the soul and our panel. These questions are phenomenal, and the responses from our great panel are phenomenal as well. I know that we've got one more question in the queue here.
Yeah, we're gonna start to wind down a little bit earlier than we normally do. I mean, last week we went crazy and ran overtime.
We did ad lib, yeah.
Sometimes we get a little nuts, but I did want to add about this beginner's mindset thing, because I am not CrossFitting or doing anything wild over here, but I am an avid practitioner of yoga. And in yoga, we talk about the beginner's mindset in a similar way, but I think the way we think about it in that respect is when you have become an expert in something, it might not be that you're always looking at perfection, but you're trying to get to the next level. And so you're used to pushing yourself over time. And then you walk into class one day and you're not allowed to do anything above a certain level. It's all super easy stuff. And the idea is that you're not really, it gets you out of that mindset of thinking of intensity all the time. And now you're thinking about, what did I have to think about when this very simple move was new to me? And why is it important for someone who is new today to still think in that way? Like, how can I bring myself back to the really simple reason? Because in yoga, when you start, all of those basics are just as important on day one as they are on day 500. And so they always take you back every so often and say, today, it's just, this is what we're doing. We're not doing, you're not learning anything new. But what happens is you wind up learning a ton of things that are new. Because when you're experienced and you go backwards, you always wind up jumping ahead. Maybe that's your 1% for the day, is that you took yourself back a little bit. And just kind of set in and understand. And then you have an appreciation, right? That gratitude piece comes in too, for what you've done and what your body has done, and what you know and what you've learned. And so I just wanted to add that too, because there's all different ways that we experience that idea of needing to step back and think about our own growth. And what we have and what we can teach others, right? Because that's also about having an instructor tell you to only do things that you've learned years ago one day is modeling that. And I think that's what we're all here to talk about.
Right on.
I know that Lainie's going to drop off, and at least one other person is going to drop off. So we might want to just kind of do a wrap up, Sean. What do you think?
I'm all for that. I want to honor the time of our panelists and honor the time of those that are attending. So yeah, let's definitely wrap up here.
Yeah. Does anyone, I'm so glad to have had this one so fast, and I'm so glad to have had everybody who's in this room today. And if we always do this at the end, if anyone in the chat wants to drop their handles in there so we can all connect with each other as we move forward and continue the conversation. I've been keeping up with tweets a little bit, but all of us are being tagged like crazy in things that we've been saying. So retweet things and keep the conversation going. And just want to leave it to our panelists if anyone wants to add something before we go for tonight.
I'll just say really quickly, this has been so much fun. It did fly by, and I would love to keep the conversation going. So I hope everyone does drop their handles in. I know some already, so that's cool. But just really think this is a conversation we can keep going because there's so much to it. And I appreciate you all. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Lainie.
Thank you, Lainie. Always grateful for you. Tara, anything to sign off with before we go?
No, I really appreciate the conversation. I think it was just so insightful. These questions were so great. Sara, thanks for coming up with them. And just being on the panel with Lainie and Meghan and Sean and being able to hear everyone's perspective on a similar topic, I think it's just so powerful. I think it's a reminder of us too, when we talk about that thermostat, mine's, being able to be adaptable is honoring and hearing all the perspectives and how people receive that based off of their own experiences and everything that they're bringing to the table. Just keeping that in mind when we're serving those that we have the honor to serve, to make sure that, we are listening, we are reading the room, we are making sure that our temperature maybe isn't always comfortable, but it's doable and we can move it, adjust it as we need.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Meghan.
Yeah, that's a great reminder as far as reading the room. And I'm working really hard on reading myself. I think the most important work that we do is the work that we do on ourselves. Everything else is secondary. And it seems like everywhere I go, there I am. I can't escape myself. And yet I'm not always a critical consumer of my own messaging. So just want to invite people to pay attention to how you talk to yourself. You're doing better than you think. And maybe you should cut yourself a little slack and talk to yourself like you would someone that you love.
Those are great ending words, I think.
Absolutely. We definitely need to get the band back together again. So I definitely, Sara, somehow we got to figure out a part two.
I was thinking that
fast.
just like 20 minutes ago in the middle of a question. I was like, I think we need to do something else. And I would love to do something where we try to get every panel together.
Yeah.
All of our past participants into some major like summit of some sort. That would be
fun. And we've got some panelists that are past panelists that are here as attendees, and always grateful to see them. I know Lauren is here, and Stacy as well, and we've got some future panelists coming up as well. So much love there. Thank you, Lainie, and thank you all. Let's remember to write back, and we'll keep the conversation going with the hashtag Adapt, Lead, and Connect. Feel free to follow all of us. I can attest to having just friendships with Tara and Meghan and Lainie, that they do write back, and that they do respond, and they're great folks to have in the bandwidth and the thought partner with, just as Sara and I will do the same for you as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and to everybody watching this in replay, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all next time.